Only two former Soviet republics have ever reached the World Cup, Russia and Ukraine. This month, a third joined them, and the first from Central Asia. 3 years, 3 age groups, 3 continental finals. In 2023, Uzbekistan were crowned Asian champions at under 20. In 2024, they reached the under 23 final and qualified for the Olympics for the first time. In 2025, they won the under 17 Asian Cup. Quietly, methodically, a country was winning at every level of the game at once. So when the senior team walked out at the World Cup on June 18th for the first time in history, and Uzbek Fayzullaev scored the nation's first ever goal against Colombia, it should not have surprised anybody who'd been paying attention. This wasn't a bolt from the blue. It was the top of a pyramid that had been built deliberately from the bottom up. And that's the story most of the coverage is missing. Uzbekistan didn't get lucky, it built something. I'm Bruce Pannier. I've spent 4 decades covering the former Soviet Union. This is Turan Research Center, hosted by the Ortown Institute, where we break down the geopolitics of Turkey, Iran, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. If you're new here and want more analysis like this, please like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's get into it.
Shuncha sabr! Barchangizni tabriklaymiz! Butun O'zbekistonni! Bu hammamizning g'alabamiz!
Start with the celebration everyone saw, and the disappointment that followed. The road to Mexico City ran through a goalless draw away to the United Arab Emirates in June 2025. That single point secured direct qualification out of Asia's final round and ended decades of near misses. The penalty shootouts lost, the final round heartbreaks, and the temptation is to tell it as a fairy tale. One golden generation, one brilliant coach, a bit of luck, but that framing misses the whole point completely. Because Uzbekistan had golden generations before, it had talented squads that came agonizingly close and fell short. The difference this time wasn't the talent, it was that for the first time, there was a structure strong enough to carry the talent to the world stage with some consistency. Qualification was the headline. The system behind it, and the gap exposed once Uzbekistan got there is the story. That's the thesis of the whole video. The qualification is the headline, the system behind it, the Soviet inheritance, the tragedy that broke a generation, the prestige projects that flamed out, the selection failures, and recent genuine attempt at reform. That is the story, and it's not finished. Something striking happened the moment Uzbekistan qualified. The celebration didn't just stay in Uzbekistan. Across Central Asia, people treated it as a shared achievement.
Қазақ бауырлары, қырғыз бауырлары және Өзбекстанның туын алып келіп, осында біз бүгін Өзбекстанға жан керіп аламыз, солай болса, алға Өзбекстан.
Fans in neighboring countries cheering the team, painting Uzbek flags on their faces, claiming the moment as the region's own. Some of that was organic. Some of it, according to our own reporting, was cultivated.
Это не только Узбек для Узбекистана, а для всей Центральной Азии праздник, что Узбекистан отобрался на чемпионат мира, что достойно выступает.
Based on information obtained by Turan Research Center from several sources familiar with the arrangements, Uzbek state-owned and private companies supported efforts to bring regional media figures and bloggers to the World Cup to cover the campaign for audiences back home. But the pattern points to a deliberate effort to stage this debut as a regional event, not a purely national one. And the enthusiasm wasn't only cultivated from Tashkent, it was also commercial and organic. Ahead of the Portugal match, the Kyrgyz mobile operator Mega promoted free live streaming of the game to its subscribers under the banner, "Let's support our neighbors," waiving data charges so Kyrgyz fans could watch Uzbekistan play one of the best teams in the world. And that's the tell. When a telecom in a neighboring country builds a marketing campaign around your national team, calling them our neighbors, giving the match away for free, the regional appetite is real, not just bought. Uzbek companies cultivated part of this. but a Kyrgyz company saw a commercial opportunity in it too. And think about why that matters. Central Asia usually reaches a global audience through energy, migration, security, borders, through Russia and China. Football is a rarer kind of visibility.
So you walk around and you will see people from all countries of Central Asia, all linking arms, all together. That's what everyone is seeking. We have to keep moving with this direction. It's wonderful to see. It's very inspiring. And as a friend of Central Asia, I think it's magnificent.
A World Cup place puts Uzbekistan, and to some degree its neighbors, inside one of the few events on earth watched by billions. None of which makes Central Asia one football culture. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan all have their own teams and their own rivalries. But a line that had stayed shut since the Soviet collapse finally opened. A Central Asian side for the first time at a World Cup. Now here's the obvious objection, and we should deal with it head on. The 2026 World Cup expanded to 48 teams. That widened Asia's path. So didn't Uzbekistan just slip through a bigger door? No, and the numbers say so. Uzbekistan finished in the top 2 of its qualifying group and went through directly, behind only Iran. Even under the old format used in 2018 and 2022, the top 2 in each final group advanced automatically. The systems aren't identical, so the comparison is imperfect. But the conclusion holds. Uzbekistan earned a position that has long meant direct qualification. The expanded field opened the road. Uzbekistan still had to walk in it. To understand the system Uzbekistan had to overcome, you have to go back before the country itself existed.
Первый матч чемпионата Советского Союза по футболу. Ташкентский Pakhtakor принимает чемпиона страны московскую команду «Торпедо».
Uzbek football didn't start from a blank page in 1991. Much of what shaped it was older than the state.
Мяч перехватывают торпедовцы и устремляются в атаку.
Soviet football was built around institutions, ministries, industries, republics. CSKA was the army's club. The Dynamo sides were tied to the security and police apparatus. Lokomotiv belonged to the railways. Clubs were institutional flags as much as football teams. They made the game political from the very start. Moscow 24's history of the era describes how Dynamo grew out of sports society linked to the security services with branches in every Republican capital, and how figures as powerful as Lavrentiy Beria attached themselves to football patronage and club rivalries. And for the republics, the clubs carried something else: pride. Dynamo Kiev, Dynamo Tbilisi, Neftchi Baku, Kairat Almaty, and Pakhtakor Tashkent. They weren't national teams, but a win over a Moscow club could read as a statement about the republic itself, one of the few sanctioned ways for the pride to surface inside the Soviet frame. Pakhtakor was Soviet Uzbekistan's football face. Its name, cotton grower, tied it directly to the republic's economic identity.
Pakhtakor. 30 градусов в тени и все 60 тысяч на трибунах.
And here's the part that matters for everything that follows. This inheritance cuts both ways. It gave Uzbekistan stadium culture, a deep fan base, real football pride.
Билеты заранее, за неделю закупали. Шли не на соперника, будем так команд, даже не на игру, а на игрока, который каждый сам себе его кумиром был.
It also handed down patronage, institutional dependence, and politicized sport, along with a familiar set of governance problems. Soviet football had its own long history of informal deals, refereeing disputes, and rigged results. The business paper Vedomosti, writing on the campaign against draws, noted that by 1977, drawn matches had grown so common that officials publicly admitted hearing some teams had stopped competing and were simply fixing outcomes. The authorities' response wasn't to fix the cause, it was to cap the number of permitted draws. A sports.ru archive of 1982 coaching seminar shows discipline, refereeing players' financial demands, and match fixing all discussed openly before the USSR even ended. These are historical testimony, not court records. I want to be precise about that. But they show governance trouble was baked into late Soviet football. It didn't vanish in 1991. It was inherited, adapted, and reproduced. And Pakhtakor carries the deepest wound of that past. In August 1979, a plane carrying the team was destroyed in a mid-air collision over Soviet Ukraine. Players and staff were killed. one of the defining tragedies of Uzbek football. As the historian Akhrar Safarov told EurasiaNet, Uzbekistan lost not only great players,
O'zbek futbolini ildizini o'sha fojia yomon urganda, kamida 20 yil, 30 yilga bo'lishi mumkin, chopilganda.
but the coaches those players would have become, a break in the knowledge, mentorship, and continuity that a still forming football culture could barely afford. Rumors and unofficial theories circulated afterward, as they did around many Soviet tragedies. They don't displace the documented record. What endures is simpler. Pakhtakor became more than a club because it carried both the ambition of Soviet Uzbekistan and the grief of its loss. And patronage and prestige model it embodied proved every bit as durable after independence. Independence didn't cost Uzbek football its ambition. The country had big clubs, loyal support, good players, and near misses painful enough to sting. What it carried, like much of the former Soviet space, were structural weaknesses. Club financing that leaned on patrons, state-linked sponsors, or local authorities instead of commercial revenue. Uneven governance, patchy youth development, and prestige projects that ran ahead of institution building. And the clearest case of all was a club called Bunyodkor. In the late 2000s, Bunyodkor became one of the most conspicuous football projects in Asia. It brought Rivaldo to Tashkent, it hired Zico, and then Luis Felipe Scolari, a World Club winning manager. For a while, it looked like modernization had arrived, but it exposed the limit of the model. The club can buy stars, it cannot buy a sustainable ecosystem. Foreign reporting tied Bunyodkor's rise to Zeromax, an opaque Swiss-registered conglomerate linked in several accounts to elite network around Gulnara Karimova, the former president's daughter. Karimova has consistently denied any connection to the company. And that opacity was the problem. The ownership and influence structures were hard to verify. The model ran on money and proximity to power, not transparent football economics. When the structures around Zeromax collapsed, so did Bunyodkor's glamour. What it left behind was unpaid wage claims, legal disputes, and debts from the Rivaldo Denelson era. Rivaldo himself pursued millions in unpaid wages and fees. The club was still working through the wreckage years later. Bunyodkor genuinely lifted Uzbekistan's profile and it produced real players. But the lasting lesson was this: prestige spending is not institution building. The question was never whether Tashkent could sign a famous name, it was whether the country could build clubs, academies, and competitions that survived after the money and political attention moved on. And the deepest problem in Uzbek football hasn't been talent. It's been selection. Who gets seen, who gets promoted, who gets overlooked, and whether the system trusts its own judgment.
Kadir, welcome to Manchester City. How does it feel to be one of our players now?
Men juda xursandman bu komandaga qo'shilganimdan. Bu komanda dunyoning eng yaxshi komandalaridan biri. Men bu yoqqa trofey yutgani keldim.
Abdukadir Khusanov is the case study. His move to Manchester City made him the most visible Uzbek footballer in the world. For many fans, the first they ever heard of. But his route there was anything but smooth. He came through Bunyodkor's academy, and according to The Guardian, the club decided at 17 that he wasn't strong enough for the first team path, offering him only a reserve place in the 3rd division. He and his father looked elsewhere. That's how he ended up at Energetik Begayu in Belarus, then Lens, then City.
Why did you choose City out of all the teams that have been watching you?
Men уже aytdim, eng yaxshi komanda, eng yaxshi murabbiy, eng yaxshi chempion.
This isn't an indictment of one club. Systems miss players everywhere. That's football. But it's a reminder that elite talent can slip straight through an imperfect domestic filter. A player good enough for Manchester City had to leave through Belarus before anyone at home recognized what he was. And other failures have eroded trust in deeper ways. In 2016, the outlet Azadlik reported the case of Ilyos Zaytulaev, who said his birth date had been altered when he was young, so that it no longer matched his documents. Age manipulation distorts youth competition, undermines academies, and makes merit-based selection almost impossible to verify. More recent cases suggest the old habits persist, but are being handled differently now. In 2026, Uzbek media reported that the under-19 head coach at the professional club Kizilkum was detained after allegedly demanding 20 million sums from a teenager born in 2008 for a place in the squad. The behavior was familiar. The public reporting and the criminal handling were not. And that's the shift worth watching. Uzbekistan has introduced criminal liability for bribery and corruption involving the people who run and play in sport. None of this means corruption has disappeared, it hasn't. It means fixing and sports bribery are now being treated as legal and institutional threats rather than internal embarrassment to be buried. Khusanov is the most visible face of the new era, but he's not the whole of it. The national team blends domestic football culture with serious professional exposure abroad. Eldor Shomurodov, Abbasbek Fayzullaev, Jalaluddin Masharipov, Atabek Shukurov, players shaped by leagues in Russia, Europe, Turkey, and the Gulf. FIFA had flagged Khusanov, Shomurodov, and Fayzullaev among Uzbekistan's headline names before the tournament. And that's the real change. Earlier, Uzbek sides often had the talent, but lacked the international rhythm. This generation has more players who know what football looks like outside the domestic system. The dressing rooms, the tactics, the pressure that comes with it. And remember those 3 trophies we opened with? The under-20s title, the Olympic qualification, the under-17 win. That's the base the senior breakthrough rests on. None of it guarantees lasting success, but it shows a pipeline broader than one golden generation, and a clearer route now from a local academy to a foreign league. Khusanov proved the path exists. It just isn't systematic yet. The breakthrough also follows a stretch of steadier attention from the state. Under President Shavkat Mirziyoyev, football has been folded into a national development agenda rather than left as a scattering of clubs. Reuters has tied the qualifications to long-term investment, football schools with youth development, refurbished school grounds, mini pitches, facilities.
Biz uchun chempionatdagi birinchi golimiz bu ham g'alaba.
And you could see what that priority looks like in practice on the morning of the Colombia match. With a kickoff at 7 a.m. Tashkent time, President Mirziyoyev ordered state institutions to push the start of the workday to 10 so the country could watch. Officials said he would watch at home with his family. In May 2026, Mirziyoyev said the country had expanded sports infrastructure, opened thousands of private schools, built neighborhood grounds, and launched schemes like every mahalla, a football field, and declared that corruption and nepotism in football had been beaten. Now that's the official narrative, not the full picture. Independent assessments still treat corruption and nepotism as persistent features of Uzbek governance. But the underlying shift is real. Football now carries state-level priority. That changes the environment a young player grows up in. You can see the same shift in money. The central contradiction of post-Soviet football has always been this. Clubs can't become real businesses while they survive on the assumption that a state company, a governor, or a connected sponsor will quietly cover the bills. As recently as 2019, Azadlik reported that the governor of Andijan levied what locals called a football tax on businesses and farmers to fund a local club. But state companies have begun pulling out of non-core sponsorship. Uzbek Nefti Gas dropped Bunyodkor, Masaf, and Bukhara.
Pro Liga va Super Liga jamoalari qaysi homiylik yoki hokimiyat tomonidan moliyalashtirib kelinadi. Hech bo'lmasa 20-30% ta'minlaydigan salohiyatga chiqmadi. Klublarimiz vaholanki 2030-yilga kelib O'zbekiston jamoalari to'liq xususiy sektor qo'liga o'tishi kerak. Afsus, bu narsaga 4 yil vaqt qoldi. Amalga oshishga, lekin buni yaqiniga keladigan ish ham qilinmadi.
And Super League clubs now receive temporary state support that deliberately tapers. 35 billion sums per club in 2026, down to 30 billion in 2027, 25 billion in 2028, as the system pushes toward private sponsorship and more independent management. It's a real transition, even if it's incomplete. Football isn't commercially independent yet. The point is the direction, away from the obligation-based funding, towards something more formal and eventually market-driven. A World Cup place can popularize the game. It cannot, by itself, make it profitable.
Biz bu yerga marojniy egani kelganimiz yo'q. davlat bayrog'i jahon chempionatida.
So here's where it stands. Uzbekistan opened against Colombia and lost 3-1. But not emptily. Fayzullaev's header gave them the first ever World Cup goal and a brief, real lead before Colombia's experience told. Then came Portugal and Houston. That one was hard to watch, 5-0, with Cristiano Ronaldo scoring twice inside the first half. Uzbekistan even had a goal of their own disallowed for a foul on the build-up. But there's no dressing it up. Against one of the best teams in the world, the gap showed. 3 matches, 3 defeats, and no place in the knockout rounds.
Gözlerin qora, yulduzisan qaysi osmonning.
The dream of a first World Cup win will have to wait.
Biz dunyoning eng kuchli terma jamoalari qatorida mundial ishtirokchisiga aylandik. Kuchli guruhda ishtirok etdik. Dastlabki gollarimizni urdik va guruh bosqichining eng chiroyli goli ham aynan Eldor Shomurodov muallifligida bo'ldi.
But the meaning of this tournament was never only about the table. It was about what Uzbekistan had built to reach this point and what the tournament revealed about how far it still has to go. And I want to be clear about what scoreline does and doesn't mean. It does not undo the achievement. The thesis of this whole video was never that Uzbekistan would beat Portugal. It was that the country finally built a structure capable of producing players, winning at youth level, and reaching this stage at all. That is intact. 5-0 is the gap between arriving in the World Cup and competing at one. And closing that gap is the work of the next decade, not the proof that the last one failed. Because qualification did not close the story of Uzbek football. It opened the next chapter. The country has produced a result earlier generations chased and missed, built from talent, a football-mad public, players seasoned abroad, sharper state attention, and a genuine effort to confront old governance failures. And the breakthrough sharpens a question it can't answer on its own. A World Cup generates money, attention, and political credit. In Uzbek football, these things have historically flowed through patronage, not institutions. We just watched a government move the workday around a football match. The same state attention that filled stadiums and built many pitches can also recapture the windfall. So the decisive test isn't whether Uzbekistan can come back to this stage or what the scoreboard said in Houston. It's whether the windfall gets reinvested into academies, into honest club finances, into selection you can trust, or recaptured by the same logic that built Bunyodkor and then left it buried in debt. Remember where we began. Abdulkadir Khusanov had to be found in Belarus because the system nearly missed him at home. This breakthrough will only have proven the system when the next Khusanov doesn't have to leave to be seen, and when a result like the one against Portugal becomes the exception, not the ceiling. Uzbekistan has reached the World Cup. Whether that becomes the foundation of a real football economy or just the peak of another prestige cycle is the question this tournament has only postponed. Thanks for watching. This video is based on an analysis by the Turan Research Center. I'll leave the link in the description if you want to read the full piece. And a special thanks to Vanguard Prague for welcoming us and allowing us to record this episode here. If you found this video informative, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. And let me know in the comments, after this group stage exit, do you think Uzbekistan reinvests this World Cup windfall into its system, or lets it slip back into the old patronage that built Bunyodkor and left it in debt?